Hello everyone, welcome to 100 Days Challenge. So, I've given the questions and now we are going to discuss the questions. And the question here, it's talking about the relevance of Ruth Benedict's pattern of culture in understanding the contemporary LGBTQ plus spectrum. How to approach this question? Because many of you might have read Ruth Benedict's pattern of culture, how personality influences culture, because this is a very confusing topic. Many of the times we understand that culture influences personality, but how is personality influencing culture? If you are having doubt in understanding this, or if you're confused, then I would suggest please go and watch the lecture of the culture personality school which I have uploaded for anthropological thought. Now we'll try to understand how to write this answer. So what you're going to do in the introduction. In the intro, you can write Ruth Benedict pattern of culture. It is a foundational text of culture personality school where she introduced the concept of cultural configuration. So through this cultural configuration, Benedict argued that normality normality is culturally selected rather than biologically fixed, because you have learnt about Apollonian, Dionysian, right? And among all the traits, only few traits are being used or leading to the personality formation, and that personality is reflecting the culture. Okay, so now who are choosing these traits or who is choosing this personality? It is people. So that means people are forming the norms. And now what is normal? It is said by people. So when what is normal, when it is being said by people, that means it is not biologically fixed, but it is culturally selected. So she was the one who can be considered as a proto-theorist for queer anthropology. So though she did not directly contribute to it, but you can consider her to be a proto theorist. So okay, who challenged the rigidity of the gender binary decades before the LGBTQ movement. Even when there was no LGBTQ plus movement, then itself she was the one who challenged this rigidity of gender binary. Okay, so you'll introduce, and then in the body part, first you need to know that Benedict has used a metaphor known as great arc. So which means that human species possess human species are having limitless spectrum. That means there are lots of temperaments, lots of behaviors, and in this spectrum of temperaments and behavior, every culture will select only a small segment of the entire. So this small segment is selected by the culture and it's said to be normal, and which she calls as great arc. And now these people are selecting this small segment and they're calling this normal, and rest they're calling as abnormal. Now, how is this relevant to LGBTQ community? So now you can understand that this concept is validating the gender spectrum. Benedict argued that what the West what the West labeled as perversion or homosexuality was simply a valid segment of the human arc. Okay, so now these West people are considering only a small arc that Western culture choose to keep it to itself and exclude the rest. Okay, so now it is the Western culture who is choosing the small arc of gender binary. What about other cultures? They can choose, they can celebrate it. So here, this concept of great arc tries to show that there is large gender spectrum and every culture chooses its own segment. Some people can choose homosexuality and some people can choose bisexuality. So it's up to them. It is not to us what to choose and what to exclude. So don't establish the norms by yourself on all and impose them on all cultures. Okay, so this is one thing that where you can link the concept of great arc to the LGBTQ relevance. And one more important thing which Ruth Benedict talks about is cultural relativity of gender. Okay, so now if you see, when you look at Zuni males, okay, so these Zuni males are considered to be very sobriety or they are gentle, and these people take up female roles. And even after taking up female roles, even if after taking up even after behaving gentle, these people are not ostracized, these people are not criticized, and these people are not ostracized, but they are revered as spiritual mediators. Okay, so they are revered as spiritual mediators. Okay, so why are we discussing this? How is it relevant to the question? Again, you can see the Apollonian pattern, which is of female, which is being behaved by the male. Here, you should understand that the binary of male or female is a Western cultural construct and it is not universal law. Here, they are not criticizing or ostracizing these Zuni male people, but they are treating them as spiritual mediators. So you need to understand here that you can link the concept of the binary or cultural relativity of gender, which she also called as bird egg. That means two spirit. Two spirit means that one being a male, they are also trying to act as a or act or imbibe the qualities of female. Okay, so that one thing you can add here. And next thing is that she also discussed the concept of misfit, an individual whose temperament is clashing with the dominant culture. So there is a dominant culture, they want a person to be like X, and there is a person Y who does not fit the temperament or it clashes with the temperament of X. Okay, so the Y's temperament is going to clash with the temperament of X, and X is something which is dominant that most of the people want it to be followed. So here, this temperament is called as misfit. Okay, an individual whose temperament does not fit the dominant temperament which cultural people like which is accepted culturally. Okay, so that's called as misfit. So similarly here, the psychological distress. So now what is happening, people want either a person should be male or female. Okay, they cannot have qualities of being a male and having a female features. Now here, the person who is looking like a male but having a female characteristics, now they have got a temperament which dominant culture won't accept. So this is considered as misfit. So because of this misfit, they'll be having psychological stress. And this psychological stress is not due to internal pathology. They don't have problem internally, but it is because of social rejection. So you need to keep in mind that the concept becomes relevant to LGBTQ plus for the reason that the same misfit concept works for the community of LGBTQ plus as well. Okay, so you can also link the modern concept here that Ilan Mayer's minority stress theory. Okay, so where the focus should shift from curing the individual to fixing the culture. Okay, so recently there was some revisit to the Benedict's framework. Okay, so there was a revisit to Benedict's framework by Syed Ayman Raza, who revisited and said that the Benedict's framework legitimates or legitimizes the cultural pluralism. Okay, so which means that LGBTQ plus today lives as coherent moral worlds than deviation. So you should not see them as deviation, but they are part of the different moral world and they're living it as a part of the existing system in a coherent manner. Okay, so any study related to Ruth Benedict, which you come across, can be quoted. Okay, so here the conclusion is that Ruth Benedict is famously known for a magazine. So there is Ruth Benedict's famous magazine, Culture is Personality, writ large. Now, if you see, the personality varies and it can change. So, when personality can change, that means culture can change. Okay, when personality is reflected onto your wall, you will see the culture. And now this personality can change, that means culture can also be changed. So, the work of Ruth Benedict gives us a cultural relativistic mirror or armor that is needed to defend the LGBTQ plus rights, saying that diversity is not unnatural, but simply a different selection. Okay, so you have a broad spectrum from that. You selected things differently. It is not unnatural, it is natural. But every culture selects their own segment or arc. Okay, so that's what you have to know and how you can link the concept. Okay, so next you have a question that evaluate the relevance, right? So there is a question, evaluate the relevance of cultural ecology in Anthropocene. Okay, and how can Julian Stewart's method help in formulating policies, etc. Okay, so now if you have to write an answer, what you'll be doing? So first in the introduction itself, okay, how you're going to write an intro. So in the intro, you have to say that Julian Stewart's theory of cultural change. So what is the name of the work? Theory of cultural change, right? So that revolutionized anthropology by proposing that culture is not just collection of traits, but a strategy or adaptive strategy to the environment. So what is happening in the Anthropocene? Now we are using lot of resources from the earth which it cannot replenish so quickly, right? So it is leading to the ecological overshoot. So in this scenario, the concept which is given by Julian Stewart becomes very important, because it argues that when environment changes, then our culture core has to adapt, or our culture will collapse. So henceforth it is very important for finding out what is our roadmap and how the same can apply for rehabilitating the climate refuges in the given times. Okay, and when you write about the information relevance in the Anthropocene, okay, see, Franz Boas argued nature only limits the possibilities. Okay, so Franz Boas talked about possibilism. Nature will only limit your possibilities. So what possibility is there, that nature will limit. But whereas Julian Stewart has talked it differently, that is neo determinism. Okay, so what is neo determinism? That, as example, you can see as the level of sea rises in Sundarbans area or deserts expand. So when these things happen, the possibilities will shrink, and you start returning to a state where environmental constraints strictly dictate your survival, and which leads to the techno environmental determinism, which is also known as neo determinism. Okay, and the same concept which Roy Rapoport used, okay, to show how rituals maintain homeostasis, because you all know that the pigs for the ancestors are used, right? So the relevance of cultural ecology when you're writing, because question is asking first what is the relevance. So then itself you can write about Roy Rapoport also, and tell that today we use this concept of maladaptation. So like what you learned in the example of pigs, because when the pigs are so many and there is very little to eat, then how the pigs are going to manage? So in that case, these people cull the pigs and have the feast, and that elevates the status, and that's all a different story. But now here, to maintain homeostasis, whenever there is maladaptive traits, okay, so cultural ecology will play an important role to identify them. Okay, so today we use cultural ecology to identify maladaptive traits. Suppose carbon intensive industrial agriculture that violates the ecosystem's carrying capacity, causing the very displacement we seek to resolve or solve it. So, this is also the help identifying maladaptive traits or auditing maladaptation is one thing where ecological anthropology can help. And how Steward's method, okay, can help in policy formulation. First thing, it can help in analyzing the interrelationship between technology and environment. Okay, so we know that there is cultural core, there is periphery. So the cultural core is directly related to the subsistence. That means it is related that how you are living. Subsistence means how your life is going on, how you are surviving. That means this is directly linked to place where you are living. That is ecological niche. So your cultural core is directly linked here. So from here we can understand how the technology and the environment interact with each other and how it can help in making policies for refugees or displaced tribes. So ecological homogeneity, if you look at the fisherman, do not resettle fisherman to inland deserts. Okay, they must be moved to similar eco-niches where the traditional technology or the skills which they have learned remain viable to prevent the pauperization. That means you don't force them to take up something. Okay, so here one way how it helps in framing the policy is we do not go for ecological sorry, we do not go for changing the ecological niche of the people in which they are specialized for. So you cannot take this fisherman to inner land and place there and ask them to leave. It's not possible for them. So it is important for maintaining ecological homogeneity in certain aspects. Okay. And next thing is that analyzing the behavior. First, understanding the relationship between technology and environment. Next, Julian Stewart analyzed behavior patterns. Okay, so now if you see subsistence economy, you have where the people own the land and not individual. Whereas as you notice in the state, it is the state which controls everything. Okay, and there it is not the community but individual is owning the land in the state. So state policies are often focusing on individuals, right? Not the society as a whole. Here, when you apply this concept of cultural ecology, you will understand where the social bonds are being broken and they are becoming individual because the resettlement that is happening is ignoring the community forest rights and they're focusing only on individual rights. Okay, so there also you can apply. And next thing is analyzing the effect on other features such as ideology or religion. Okay, so according to Julian Stewart, there is cultural core, and the cultural core consists of technology. And if this changes, this will change the mindset of the people also. Okay, so if there is loss of land, so technology and subsistence, if there is loss of land, that means they are losing the gods as well. So it can help in understanding the cultural impact that the policies are going to have, and this impact assessment can be done, and because of which the policies can be brought in such a way that if there is link of rituals and the people and the nature over there, it is better not to disturb it. Okay, LP Vidyarthi's NMS complex, simply you can understand here. And I told you, right, Julian Steward wrote the foreword to the book written by LP Vidyarthi. These things can add in your answer and then can conclude. So whatever Julian Steward teaches us, that you cannot save a refugee without saving their culture. Okay, so if you're not saving their culture, that means you're not making them live the life they actually expected for. Okay, so what you can write in the conclusion is that the way forward would be biocultural approach, designing resettlement not just as housing projects but as replicable ecosystems. This is very important. Okay, so those sounds technical, but you have to answer. And if you want to add some contemporary scholars for this, how it can be helpful in solving the climate crisis. Okay, so you can add Karamkar and Pal, so 2024. So what they say is that the tribal cosmologies or the tribal way of looking at things, how they think, it is not backward, but they're having a different way. Okay, and they are having that indigenous way of adapting to the environment, which can help you survive in the crisis also. So it is a survival thing rather than looking at it as backward. It can help us for future. Okay, so the policy that is being made should treat tribes as active agents and not as passive victims. Okay, so when you're trying to displace, look at it in a different way. And in the critique, what you can write is Eric Wolf has critiqued or criticized Stewart for ignoring the power concept in ecological aspect. Okay, so a good policy should always acknowledge that climate refugee is not only a victim of environmental racism. Okay, so it is not just because of, sorry, it is not, he is not just a victim of environment alone, but he is often a victim of environmental racism. So that means that there is involvement of power as well. So there is a need for looking at it in a political way as well. So that's what has been mentioned in political ecology work of Eric Wolf. Okay, so the conclusion you can write that Steward teaches us that you cannot save the refugee without saving their culture, and it's important to go for the biocultural approach. Whatever the design that you are making, it should not be just like you're making the resettlement for housing projects. You should treat them in such a way that you're replacing the ecosystem also, like you, sorry, you're replicating the ecosystem as well. Okay, so that they can go and survive there. Or else if you're taking the fisherman and asking them to stay in inland, so that would not be a good option. So this is with respect to the questions of the day. And if you have any doubts, you can post in the comment section. I'll be discussing. Thank you.